Good day, everyone. I am Dan Bespris, and I am fighting my way back from a pretty gnarly cold. Also, the weekend, as per usual, involved a lot of, in this particular instance, sick coaching of Little League teams. So my voice is beyond cooked right now. I'm going to do my best to get through this episode. I was unable to do a show yesterday for a variety of reasons, but probably numero uno on that list is that I really couldn't talk loudly for 20 some odd consecutive minutes. So today we're going to ease back into it with a team that I think we can cover in kind of a shorter episode, and that's the San Antonio Spurs, who, as we flash their roster up on the screen for you folks watching, had a relatively poor season last year. I think there was an assumption that they were going to make a giant leap forward. That's always, you kind of have to look at timelines a little bit on that front. And they made all the moves to take that step forward, but the pieces just didn't fall into place. Victor Wembanyama left with a blood clot. He ended up missing 36 ball games last year. They traded for De'Aaron Fox, who was dealing with a finger issue, and he ended up missing 20 games over the course of last year, most of those coming after his trade to San Antonio. But that sets the Spurs up now for a better opportunity to make a little bit of a push at it this season. The bad news for San Antonio is that there aren't that many fantasy options on this team that actually deserve your attention. The good news is that's because the fantasy stats are going to be pretty well clustered around four main guys. And then there's going to be a bunch of dudes that are all kind of fighting for scraps. So before we get started, hit that like button on your YouTube page, subscribe, however you're taking in the content. I do appreciate you guys joining us here on the Old Man Squad Sports Network. Hopefully you guys had a chance to listen to Kingy's return to content creation. Back in Australia after a couple of weeks here in the States, and he rolled out a mock draft. I know you guys love the Kingy early mock draft, so that's rolling here on the Old Man Squad Network as well. So let's just jump into it. Obviously, the first player we're going to talk about is Victor Wembanyama, who is not the consensus number one, because I would still prefer Nikola Jokic, but certainly one of the two players being considered for that first overall spot. I will do my best to turn my microphone off when I'm making disgusting sinus and guttural noises today, trying to get through the episode. Wemby enters his third season in the NBA. Boy, my voice had a little bit of strength for like the first 2 minutes there, and it's already cooked. This is a rough one, man. Laryngitis sucks. Last year, field goal percent jumped by 4. Field goal percent went up by 1. Made 3 3-pointers a game. That was one of the big changes. Took a bunch more 3-pointers, which kind of held his field goal percent in check, even though the 2-point percent actually got a bit better as well. 24 points, 11 rebounds, ridiculous, almost 4 blocks a game. Also had a steal and close to 4 assists. He's awesome. You know, fantasy standpoint, he is a very easy player to build around because you get the hyper over-the-top elite blocks. You now get a free throw percent positive out of Wemby, which you didn't get in his rookie season. He didn't score, I think, as much as folks would have hoped for. And if he does add to that this year, that's why he takes another step forward. Field goal percent ticking up would be another way to kind of take a step forward, but he does take a lot of 3-pointers. So it's hard to see the field goal percent really taking a massive step up. Maybe small incremental would be a little bit easier to kind of wrap our minds around. The ease with which you can build a team using Victor Wembanyama comes from the fact that he gives you hyper elite stats in a handful of categories, and that makes it pretty easy, especially on the head-to-head side, to build around that. You get a good free throw percent out of your center, so that makes it really easy to build around free throw percent as you go. You get a great start in rebounds and blocks. You get an okay start in assists out of a big man. You get a really good start in 3-pointers out of a big man. So he actually fits a lot of guard build type of teams, and then you can just add on 1 or 2 of the big man stats, but maybe not all of them. And that's kind of the way you probably look at a head-to-head team around Victor Wembanyama. It's why I still like Nikola Jokic as my number one guy in Roto, because you just get more categories to start with, even if they're not as over-the-top elite as Wemby's blocks, even if you don't get that sort of like polar big and I feel like I'm describing a kind of bear, but you get the polar positive for Wemby, and then you have the weak categories where with Nikola Jokic, there really isn't a weak category. You get a lot of very, very good, which for a 9 category, that's an easier player to build around. For Wemby, if you're punting, even like one thing, punting field goal percent with Victor Wembanyama makes him an extraordinary fantasy basketball player, which he already is. But you remove field goal percent, he does move ahead of Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as the number 1 player in fantasy. Adding on to the top of that, the fact that he's a center. So that was one of the guys that's usually a good field goal percent dude, and now you don't even have to worry about it. So, yes, obviously Victor's been amazing. The issue going into this season is how much we trust that this blood clot stuff is over. Odds are he'll be fine. But, hands out to the sides, shrug emoji kind of thing. We can't know for certain. Is this the thing that crops back up as Wemby's career goes on? I don't know. He's built like basically nobody in the history of the NBA. So could he be predisposed to weird stuff? I hope not. But it is another reason why I'm just the tiniest bit nervous. You have to take him if you have the 2 or the 3. I guess you could make an argument for Shai in a 9-cat league where you're not punting anything. And that would drop Wemby to 3rd in my book. But, you certainly can't take him any later than 3rd. And if that's the way you want to play it, head-to-head, you probably should take him 2nd. Roto, if you wanted to take him 3rd, I'd be okay with that. But regardless of the blood clot stuff, I think he has to go inside the top 3. Let's see. What do we got here? Before we get to the next one, this is hard, man. I can't put my whole body into these ad reads when I don't have any voice, but BetOnline continues to be your number 1 source for sports betting action. Baseball in full swing. Guys, we're just going to get through the show today. You're going to bear with me. We're going to get through it. Football season's around the corner. BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, and even live in-game betting. From MLB to UFC to tennis to NFL futures to WNBA to soccer, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering information. And in between games, head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style action, including poker and a live casino. Plus, at BetOnline today, you can take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. BetOnline, the game starts here. Next player I want to talk about is the aforementioned De'Aaron Fox, who the Spurs picked up in a midseason trade with the Sacramento Kings. He settled in just fine in San Antonio. You could argue, I don't even know what the hell you'd argue with De'Aaron Fox. He was number 41 on the year. He was a little bit worse in San Antonio, but it feels like that was probably just an aberration because he didn't shoot the ball well with the Spurs. He's a 47% career field goal guy, and he was at 44.5 in San Antonio. The thing to watch out for was the decrease in usage. The lower field goal percent was problematic. I don't think that's going to hold. But he went from 20 shots a game in Sacramento and, somewhere between 6 and 7 assists most years with the Kings to the same number of assists in San Antonio, but he was more so tasked with initiating as opposed to being the primary scorer because they had Wemby and adding other pieces around him. So he only averaged 20 points with the Spurs as opposed to more like 23 to 26 with Sacramento. This is what YouTubers are seeing on their screen right now. 3-pointers went from 2 back down to 1.5. Free throw percent, oddly enough, De'Aaron Fox was a very popular punt free throw guard build guy. He actually fixed that this year. I don't know if that's a thing that's going to hold long term, but for the first time in his career, he broke 80%, and by a good chunk, he was at 82.5% this year. Yeah, somewhere in that neck of the woods. which is, again, not a massive positive per se, but he was no longer the negative that he had been through the first 7 years of his NBA career. De'Aaron Fox, by all accounts, will probably be a relatively safe pick somewhere inside the top 50, but it is worth noting that during his time in San Antonio, he was more like a 50 to 60 range fantasy player. 20 points and 7 assists is very good. 1.5 steals is very good. Let's say the field goal percent comes back up to 47, which I'm hoping it will because he's playing with, good players. Like he went from a Sacramento team where he had Sabonis and he had some good players around him. He goes to a Spurs team where he has good players around him as well. He shot 27% from downtown with the Spurs. That's a number that's probably going to come back a little bit. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that the field goal percent does come back to where it normally is. That pushes him up from 60 to, probably something in the 40s on a per game basis. He'll probably get drafted earlier than that because of how many years he had put up 25 and 7 with good steals numbers and some 3-pointers. And if you took him in the late 30s, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I think there's going to be better options in the 30s this year. And Fox is a guy that I would much prefer to target in the 40s just based on what we saw in San Antonio this past season. And also accounting for what's likely to be a positive mean reversion for Fox in field goal percent. Because if that comes back up a little bit, then, he's over 20 points a game. Not by a lot, but, 20 and a half or something like that. And there's those little incremental bumps. And it's pretty easy to move from number 60 to number 45 if you fix one thing that had kind of turned into a little bit of a negative. I don't have a whole lot more to say on Fox. The Spurs no longer have Chris Paul. So if you were thinking like, oh, that's a reason that Fox maybe played 2 or 3 minutes less in San Antonio than he did in Sacramento, I'm not too worried about that. I think, depending on how this year goes for the Spurs, I'm sure they'd love to keep his minutes to 34 instead of 36. But also, if there's a lot of close ball games, then he'll play a few more minutes, like he's De'Aaron Fox. He'll be fine to rack up a whole bunch of minutes. You just, like, the games, you can look at the board here. There were games where he played 27 minutes in San Antonio, and it wasn't entirely clear why every time. Some of them were blowouts. Some of them were not. He'll get those mid-30s. I don't think you'll see the number of 20-some-odd minutes games. And also, you figure with the hand fixed, he will likely handle the ball better and shoot the ball better. We don't know. Can't say any of these things for certain, but it does feel probable that he'll be a little bit better this year with the Spurs than he was during his partial season last year. Oh, the voice is going, but we're hanging in there. Next player I want to talk about is Devin Vassell, who had a up and down. I was trying to think of like the calmest way to describe the season for Vassell. He had an up and down season. He finished at number 81 in 64 ball games, 16 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, 1.3 steals, half a block, 2.5 3-pointers, and 44-79 splits. Not as good as what we were hoping for. Was better the second half of the year, but that was mostly because defensive stats were better. It wasn't like his numbers made a really big shift. He just went from 1.6-ish steals and blocks combined the first half to more like 2 in the second half, and that's enough to bump you up a round and a half. So, yeah, I mean, he was like around number 90-something the first half of the year. He was 60-something the second half of the year. It feels like he's a pretty predictable usage guy at this point, and he's going to get somewhere around 13 to 14 shots per game. Did he do more when Victor Wembanyama went down? A little bit. He mostly just shot the free throw better. Like, it didn't seem to matter who was in and who was out for Vassell. He pretty much did the same stuff every time. Wemby was out. He took 13.5 shots per game. Wemby was in. He took 13.5 shots per game. Fox was in. Fox was out. He was always around 13 to 14 shots. His season and his rank fluctuation pretty much hinged on whether he was getting a bunch of defensive stats or only like some, and whether he was shooting mid-80s from the free throw line or high 70s. So if we're looking at the handicap on Devin Vassell, I think what we saw last year is fairly repeatable. I would love to see him play more basketball games. I think you'll probably see the minutes trend up a little bit if he can maintain his health. So the hope is that he gets back up to more like 33 minutes per game, which, I don't know that that's going to change his scoring output all that much, but more minutes typically equates to more rebounds, more assists, more steals, more blocks, that kind of stuff. But gone, I'm afraid, are the days of hoping that Vassell was going to make a big leap into something like the top 40 or top 50. He just has too many players around him on the Spurs right now that demand the basketball, and for good reason. Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, both better scoring options than Vassell. And you also have some youth on this team. Plus, you have like 6 guys that are all competing for wing minutes that we'll sort of mention in a rapid-fire lightning round moment towards the end of the podcast today. So what do you do with Devin Vassell? I think you treat him as a relatively safe product. You assume he's going to miss something like 10 to 12 ball games. It feels like a relatively reasonable number. That does not make him a massively appealing head-to-head option, but a guy that you can probably draft in the 80s, I would assume this year, is where he'll probably go. And that's probably around where he'll finish. Maybe there's a little bit of upside if he shoots the ball better this year, if he has a better free throw percent or whatever. There's not a ton of downside with Vassell. Outside, I would assume, of injury-related stuff. That's probably the downside on Devin. So, sometimes it's fine to take a guy that you think is going to just match his ADP, and that's probably what Vassell is going to be. And here is the one that I wanted to leave some time for, and I'm hoping that my voice can kind of hang in there another 5 or 6 minutes here, but we're doing breathing exercises to make sure that I'm talking from my belly. I must talk from my belly because I have no voice up here up top. Stefon Castle is the next player I want to talk about. And I know what you guys are thinking. I was like, Dan, there's Harrison Barnes, there's Julian Champagny, there's Dylan Harper, there's Keldon Johnson, there's Jeremy Sohan. All of those guys are going to be meh this year. They're all going to be fighting for scraps. So, no, I don't think I'm drafting any of them because it's frankly not clear who even has the lead position in that group. I'm assuming Sohan, but I don't know. They might go to a floor spacing model. They might go to a rangy defensive model with a Julian Champagny. I really don't know. They might go to the old GOAT and play Harrison Barnes. So let's not worry about that spot. Instead, let's worry about Steph Castle, who, by all accounts, had a pretty damn successful rookie year. He averaged 15 points, almost 4 boards, 4 assists, a steal, 1.2 3-pointers, 0.3 blocks, which is not 0. He did it in only 27 minutes a ball game. Plus, he played in 81 games this past year. So, in addition to putting up half-decent numbers, he was also relatively healthy. The problem, of course, is that when you just look at the counting stats, you don't see the problems with Stefon Castle. And they were large this past year. He was a medium volume, bad field goal percent guy, a medium volume, bad free throw percent guy, and averaged 2.5 turnovers to go along with those 4-ish assists during the second half of the season. 2.2 for the entire year when, beginning of the year, he wasn't doing as much. So there's a lot to fix with Castle. And I bring that up because it's sort of, it brings us to an overarching strategic point that those of you who've been following me for a long time, you kind of know where this is going. The guys like Stefon Castle, when they have breakouts, old man squad fantasy basketball, we tend to miss those types of guys. I'm not that upset about it. This is like one of those things. My dad, may he rest in peace, used to say, I'm comfortable with my shortcomings, which drove my mother insane because she was like, please try to get better. I've been with you for almost 5 decades. Don't be an ass. But at the same time, sometimes you just have to be comfortable with taking some L's if you feel like it gets you more W's in the long run. And for me, and you guys do not have to follow me down this path. You might like, 95% of what we do on this show, and this might be the 5% that you don't like. I don't like chasing bad percentages, guys, even if they're extremely exciting and even if the path to value is super obvious, because it is. I'm not arguing that Stefon Castle doesn't have a really obvious path to value, because this is especially down the stretch when he started to do more, Victor Wembanyama went down and De'Aaron Fox went down. And as the season continued, his usage just kept getting higher and higher and higher. And in the final month of the year, he was up to 15 shots a game. He was averaging 19, 5.5, and almost 7. He was putting up big, big counting numbers, but he was doing it on 42.5% from the field and 74.5% at the free throw line. So, even with all of that, you had to punt both percentages to make him a 9-cat startable guy. The path is he fixes his percentages. How common is that? It is very common for a rookie going into their second season to get better at percentages because the game starts to slow down a little bit. And, Castle shot 28.5% from downtown. That's a big drag on his overall number. But we also kind of have to know, there's the question of, is this the feature of the bug? Or is how much does a player usually improve on their stats? And the answer is a little bit, not a whopping, overwhelming amount. It's also worth pointing out that this is a guy who did not shoot the 3-ball well in college and did not shoot the free throw well in college. Mind you, it was only 1 year, so we're talking limited sample size stuff. But he was a 75% foul shooter at UConn. He shot 47% from the field, which wasn't bad, given he's a wing type player. But he wasn't a high steals and blocks guy in college. So I don't know that we can expect that to be a big selling point for his overall value. And by the way, we didn't have particularly high steals and blocks his rookie season. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't, the thing that's going to float his value. The thing that's going to float Stefon Castle is scoring, decent rebounding from a guard spot. You can get guard eligibility with him most places. Some assists, because, ball in hand kind of thing. And we're hoping at some point, one of the two percentages, odds are both are not going to get fixed. So for me, even though you could point and say, this is a guy where if you pile a bunch of usage on him, he could be really entertaining. I'm not touching him in 9-cat, even with a single punt. Because we're talking about a guy that even down the stretch, the real stretch, I'm talking the late, the last 10 games of the year, Stefon Castle was playing 32 minutes, 15 shots. He was at 19 and 7. But you still had to punt, field goal, free throw, and turnover. All three of those to get him inside the top 100. Then he was number 67. If you unpunted any of those three, he falls back outside the top 100. He's right at the edge of it if you were only punting free throw and turnovers during that stretch. Oh, the voice is fading, friends. We got to get to the end of this one before I start coughing dust into the microphone. Overarching point here on Castle is he's not my type of flyer in a 9-cat league. I understand if you don't subscribe to that. I'm totally fine with it because he will likely score points and get rebounds and get assists. Seamless editing. You knew nothing happened there. I had a phone call and then I lost my train of thought. So we were finishing up, I should say, with Stefon Castle, who and this is not as much about Castle as it is about this type of player who is a points league darling. He makes a lot of sense in a points league. You get points, you get boards, you get assists, you get consistent counting stats, which are the easiest things to predict on a night-to-night basis. But you get it on awful percentages and kind of rough turnovers. And that's the rookie stuff. And again, it'll probably get better this coming year. But he'll also be with a healthy Wembanyama, we assume, a healthy De'Aaron Fox, we hope, healthy Devin Vassell. And so even if he's, 3A, 3B with Vassell, that doesn't leave that much room for him to do more. So if he doesn't fix all of the percentages, then you're really in a bit of a tight spot. So that's a no for me. I get it. He's going to be on a lot of sleeper boards. I don't have a big problem with it. He's just not the kind of player that I target because I don't see the ability. That's the wrong word, because obviously you see the basketball ability. I don't see the pathway for him to climb the 9-category rank boards without some really hard squinting and finagling. Because we already kind of saw, like, we see what his fantasy stat set is, and it's a difficult one to translate without some pretty significant changes. Whereas compare it to like Dyson Daniels last year, where his percentages might not have looked serviceable, but we also saw ways for him to explode onto the scene with, a ton of steals, and we saw the rebounds and the assists from his position. And, we had this weird little sample size thing with Dyson Daniels when he got playing time, and we saw all the assists, but we also saw him shoot like 32% during those 3 weeks. And in 9-cat, he was still ranked like 140th, where you're like, okay, like if that's in the mid 40s, he's way up the board. And then he did more than we ever expected. But that was kind of a different thing where you saw a guy go from a very limited role to a much larger one. This is a guy going from a sort of like medium large role already to probably a slightly larger one. But it doesn't seem like it's going to make that big of a difference in overall ranking because of how many things are negatives on his fantasy table. And then we'll go back to the Spurs overall roster here at the end. Harrison Barnes, no. Fantasy game is not good enough. Julian Champagny, I do like his fantasy game, but I don't think he's going to get consistent enough minutes. Keldon Johnson, problematic fantasy game. Jeremy Sohan does have some fantasy game, but is going to be fighting for minutes with those other guys. If Sohan gets the starting spot, you could take a look at him in certain punt builds. He's a guy who's kind of a punt threes dude. He could be treated as a bit of a punt free throw guy as well. I mean, he wasn't that far off, but also he wasn't that close. And he only played 25 minutes a game last season when the Spurs, I would argue, were not as deep. They're deeper now, adding, more rookies and whatever. And I know Chris Paul is gone, but like everybody else is basically there. And then we assume that guys like Castle are going to just do more. All right, got through the podcast. My voice is not all the way dead, but it sure feels like it's about to be. We'll just wrap this thing up. Please subscribe on your way out. We'll be back with you tomorrow. I'm Dan Vespers. I'll see you guys on social. Pray for my larynx later.